Good morning. I'm Robert Eric West, and I'd like to welcome you to A Moment in Black History. Martin Luther King Jr. was born Michael King Jr. on January the 15th, 1929. He was an American Baptist minister and activist who became the most visible spokesman and leader in the American civil rights movement. King advanced civil rights through nonviolence and civil disobedience, inspired by his Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Mahatma Gandhi. He was the second of three children born to Michael King and Alberta King. King's maternal grandfather, Adam Daniel Williams, was a minister in rural Georgia and moved to Atlanta in 1893 and became pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1894. In his adolescence years, King Sr. left his parents' farm and walked to Atlanta to attend school to get a high school education. He later enrolled in Morehouse College to study for entry into the ministry. King Sr. and Alberta began dating in 1920 and married on November 25, 1926. Shortly after marrying Alberta, King Sr. became assistant pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. Senior Pastor Williams died in the spring of 1931, and King Sr. took over as pastor, and over time raised attendance from 600 to several thousand. In 1934, the church sent King Sr. on a multinational trip to Rome, Egypt, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, then Berlin for the meeting of the Baptist World Alliance. The trip also included visits to sites in Germany associated with the Reformation leader Martin Luther. While there, King Sr. witnessed the rise of Nazism. In reaction, the Baptist World Alliance Conference issued a resolution that stated, "This Congress deplores and condemns as a violation of the law of God, the Heavenly Father, all radical animosity and every form of oppression or unfair discrimination toward the Jews, toward colored people, or towards all races in any part of the world." King Sr. returned home in August of 1934, and at that time changed his name to Martin Luther King, and his son's name to Martin Luther King Jr. As a child, Martin Jr. became friends with a white boy whose father owned a business across the street from his family's home. In September of 1935, when the boys were about 6 years old, they started school. King had to attend a school for black children, while his close playmate went to a separate school for white children only. Soon afterwards, the parents of the white boy stopped allowing King to play with their son, stating to him, "We are white and you are colored." When King relayed this to his parents, they had a long discussion with him about the history of slavery and racism in America. Upon learning of the hatred, violence, and oppression that black people had faced in the U.S., King would later state that he was determined to hate every white person. His parents instructed him that it was his Christian duty to love everyone. King witnessed his father stand up against segregation and various forms of discrimination. Once he was stopped by a police officer who referred to King Sr. as a boy. King's father responded sharply that King Jr. was a boy and that he was a man. When King's father took him to a store in Atlanta to buy shoes, the clerk told them they needed to sit in the back. King's father refused, stating that "We're either going to buy shoes sitting here or we won't be buying shoes at all," before taking King and leaving the store. He told King Jr. afterwards, "I don't care how long I live in this system, I will never accept it." In 1936, King's father led hundreds of African Americans in a civil rights march on City Hall in Atlanta to protest voting rights discrimination. In his adolescent years, he initially felt resentment against whites due to the radical humiliation that he, his family, and his neighbors often had to endure in the segregated South. In 1942, when King was 13 years old, he became the youngest assistant manager of a newspaper delivery station for the Atlanta Journal. That year, King skipped ninth grade and was enrolled in Booker T. Washington High School, where he maintained a B-plus average. The high school was the only one in the city for African American students. It had been formed after local black leaders, including King's grandfather, urged city government in Atlanta to create it. In high school, King would become known for his public speaking ability, with a voice that had grown into a baritone. He proceeded to join the school's debate team. King continued to be most drawn to history and English, and chose English and sociology to be his main subjects while in school. King maintained an abundant vocabulary, but he relied on his sister Christine to help him with his spelling, while he assisted her with her math. On April the 13th, 1944, in his junior year, King gave his first public speech during an oratorical contest sponsored by the Improved Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks of the World in Dublin, Georgia. In this speech, he stated, "Black America still wears chains. The finest Negro is at the mercy of the meanest white man. Even winners of our highest honors face the class color bar." King was selected as the winner of the contest. On the bus ride back to Atlanta, he and his teacher were ordered by the bus driver to stand so that white passengers could sit. The driver of the bus called King a black son of a bitch. King initially refused, but complied after the teacher told him that they would be breaking the law if he didn't do as the bus driver directed. As all the seats were occupied, he and his teacher were forced to stand for the entire trip back to Atlanta. Later, King wrote about the incident, saying, "That night will never leave my memory. It was the angriest I've ever been in my life." During King's junior year in high school, Morehouse College, an all-male historical black college that King's father and grandfather had attended, began accepting high school juniors who passed the school's entrance exam. In 1944, at the age of 15, King passed the entrance exam and was enrolled at the university during the fall. In the summer before King started his freshman year at Morehouse, he boarded a train with a friend, Emmett Proctor, and a group of other Morehouse College students to work at a cigar business in Simsboro, Connecticut. This was King's first trip outside of the segregated South. In a letter written on June 1944 to his father, he wrote about the differences that struck him between the two parts of the country. "On our way here, we saw so many things I had never anticipated to see. After we passed Washington, there was no discrimination at all. The white people here are very nice. We go to any place we want and sit anywhere we want to." On Sunday, they would go to Hartford to attend church services at a church filled with white congregants. King wrote to his parents about the lack of segregation in Connecticut, relaying how he was amazed they could go to one of the finest restaurants in Hartford and that Negroes and whites go to the same church. The summer before his last year at Morehouse in 1947, the 18-year-old King chose to enter the ministry. Throughout his time in college, King studied under the mentorship of its president, Baptist minister Benjamin Mays, who he would later credit as being his spiritual mentor. At age 19, King graduated from Morehouse with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology. He later enrolled in Crozer Theological Seminary in Upland, Pennsylvania, and graduated with a Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1951. Later that year, he began doctoral studies in systematic theology at Boston University. He also attended philosophy classes at Harvard University as an audit student in 1952 and 1953. In 1954, at the age of 25, King was called as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He received his PhD degree on June 5, 1955. While studying at Boston University, he asked a friend from Atlanta named Mary Powell if she knew any nice Southern girls. Powell asked fellow student Coretta Scott if she was interested in meeting a Southern friend studying divinity. Scott was not interested in dating preachers, but eventually agreed to meet Martin on the basis of Powell's description. They eventually started dating, and after the second date, King was certain Scott possessed the qualities he sought in a wife. King married Coretta Scott King on June the 18th, 1953, and they became the parents of 4 children. During their marriage, King limited Coretta's role in the civil rights movement, expecting her to be a housewife and mother. On June 29, 1968, King was in Memphis, Tennessee in support of black sanitation workers. On April the 3rd, King addressed a rally and delivered his I've Been to the Mountaintop speech at Mason Temple, the world headquarters of the Church of God in Christ. He was staying at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. On Thursday, April the 4th, 1968, Dr. King was fatally shot by James Earl Ray at 6:01 p.m. as he stood on the hotel's second-floor balcony. The bullet entered through his right cheek, smashing his jaw, then traveling down his spinal cord before lodging in his shoulder. After emergency surgery, Dr. King died at St. Joseph's Hospital at 7:05 p.m. Dr. King was initially buried in South View Cemetery in South Atlanta, but in 1977 his remains were transferred to a tomb on the site of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park. Join me next week on this station and on our Facebook page as I continue to highlight our history as proud African Americans.